Dean, colleagues, friends, new students, and new alumni, thank you all for inviting me here. It is, in fact, an honor and a source of considerable satisfaction to be able to be with you 10 years after the establishment of the school, which I remember well, and we were very excited about it when I was at Columbia. But of course, this afternoon I bring greetings from Cairo. For most people outside the Arab world, the Arab Uprisings of 2011 do not seem to have much to recommend them these days. More than 2 years later, Tunisia continues to stumble. Libya seems to be perpetually disintegrating. Egypt is in the midst of an existential debate about the least bad government. Syria is about to be attacked by major powers. Even countries that are not Arab, like Turkey, or saw no uprising like Iraq, seem to have taken a turn for the worse, seeing ever more violent strife in recent months. Is there anything to be said for these revolts, anything that might redeem them and redeem the blood that is being shed in their name in the larger sweep of history? As squeamish as I am about spilled blood, I actually think there is. There are elements in what is happening in the Middle East today that are edifying and instructive. This is, I know, not what you who are planning careers in public policy in the 21st century are typically told. But then, you are not typically congratulated by someone who lives in Cairo, and that may be the first redeeming or at least noteworthy feature of this tumult. We live in a century in which not everything that is interesting and important and innovative is necessarily in Europe, or even in the global north. As someone who was born in exactly the mid-20th century, I can tell you from personal experience that this has not always been as obvious as it is today. I happened, unusually, to encounter a historical figure named Muhammad Ali, or Mehmet Ali, the 19th century father of modern Egypt, in my first year at university. Only several years later did I use him as a foil for the study of Bismarck in a seminar paper on a course in modern Europe. And my European history professor was shocked. Muhammad Ali was the Bismarck of Egypt, not the other way around. Now, I knew at the time that my education was somewhat disordered. I certainly should have known of Bismarck before I ever encountered Muhammad Ali, representing, as he did, a backward country, not a major power. Even though, of course, in fact, my chronology was actually accurate. Muhammad Ali died, having remade Egypt and much of the region, in 1849, long before Bismarck even began to build the German Empire. Actually, Bismarck was the Muhammad Ali of Germany, even though even now that seems sort of impertinent to say. But in fact, today, and perhaps belatedly, the world is being reordered, and the priority is not necessarily to Europe or North America. Perhaps simple chronology will triumph over European and North American triumphalism. We will learn about who actually came first, appreciating what was achieved in the order in which it was done. But more likely, we will not care about priority or power as much as we will value innovation and agility wherever it appears in the 21st century. And that brings me to my second and more important observation about the uprisings in the Arab world. They reflect, in all of their mixed and terrifying glory, a conviction that your generation, you who are now students and alumni, should not and indeed cannot live the way your parents lived, nor be content with the skills your professors teach you. And I say that in front of the faculty. Now, before we say that you cannot emulate or learn from them, let us concede the remarkable accomplishments of the generation of your parents and your faculty. Thanks in no small part to their efforts, almost all of you have had the good fortune to spend most of your lives in peace, relative prosperity, remarkable stability, and considerable personal freedom. I do not begrudge you that. On the contrary, it is exactly what I wanted for my own children. But interestingly, it has obscured in many ways just how profound are the cataclysmic changes that are taking place around us. For both the very fortunate of this world, including everyone in this room, and I am sorry to say, the very unfortunate, the range of life possibilities are relatively narrow by the standards of human history. You are not going to slip uncontrollably into a life without clean water, electricity, and adequate shelter. You are not going to live and die malnourished, illiterate, and diseased. And most people who face those life prospects have no possibility of living the lives that you anticipate, lives that are, remarkably, almost completely free from want and fear. This narrowing of the range of possibility has allowed us to understand risk as something to calculate and manage. The standard deviations of our lives are pretty predictable. We have made politics, which was once so tightly associated with violence that politics and wars seemed merely extensions of each other, into policymaking. And we have often reduced policy to analysis. We are fast consigning our future to technicians. Small wonder that the emblematic figure of modern post-industrial warfare today is the anonymous desk-bound engineer somewhere in the southwest of the United States guiding drones to deadly strikes in Afghan and Yemeni mountain passes thousands and thousands of miles away. Small wonder we hesitantly debate the disappearance of what we quaintly call personal privacy into the vast impersonal soup of big data. This is not the way the Arab world is working. There is very little data, big or small. Governments that have not collected taxes have not needed to know how many people are not paying them. And so even simple numbers like population figures are vague, approximate, and contested. In worlds where half the commercial transactions are unrecorded, and that includes Egypt, what records there are really more like novelistic impressions than statistical handbooks. Evidence is necessarily anecdotal, and that means that evidence-based policymaking is really built on stories heard and convictions held and hopes cherished. And conflict, as you can see on television every day, far from the sterile robotic surgical strike, is not even managed by the rough and tumble of institutionalized political competition. Far from the quietly purring machines of public policy in Brussels or Washington or even Seoul, politics and administration here, that is, in the Arab world, is sometimes quite literally hand-to-hand combat, or worse, trench warfare. Today, the range of possibility in the Arab world is vast, which is both the promise and the peril. In the protests of Tahrir Square and the militias of Benghazi and the car-bombed markets of Baghdad are writers and illiterates, communists and jihadis, doctors and diseased, mothers and babies, bankers and beggars. And they see in each other possibilities. They see both opportunities and threats that their counterparts in most of the rest of the world rarely encounter. Yes, I know, there are certainly other places where the rich and poor encounter each other. The subways of New York City is one of my favorites. But they do not share the common sense of grievance and a common purpose to demand what they have not had and what they believe they deserve. The variety and vastness of the possibilities in the Arab world account for what can only be described as the profoundly clumsy and inept character of most of our analysis of the Arab Uprisings. The range of actors and outcomes is so much broader than is typically the case in political upheavals. After all, how many illiterate peasants protested at Gdansk? How many bankers and jihadis joined hands against Pinochet? That our mental risk tables and our conventional calculations of probabilities are as much liabilities as assets. Are these uprisings against the incumbent government, the entire regime, perhaps even the very state, maybe the regional order? Will the demise of Gaddafi in Libya lead to a new regime, or a civil war, or perhaps even a new polity in the Sahara? What exactly are the issues and social cleavages that matter? How is it that some debates and quarrels seem to be reshaped from country to country, and some remain very parochial? We run through our mental heuristics. Is this the French Revolution, the fall of communism? Indonesia in 1998, Brazil in 1995. Is it 1848 Europe, 1992 Algeria, de Gaulle and the Fourth Republic? Just today in the International Herald Tribune, a columnist published the proposition that the tumult in the Arab world is like the 30 years that preceded the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, long, deadly, and finally extinguished by the bankruptcy of the outside powers that bankrolled the combatants. Is this right? What is this? It is some, of course, and none of that at the same time. But our increasingly desperate efforts to find patterns, to establish parameters, to make predictions, reveal as much about the inadequacy of our analytical frameworks as it does about the historical moments and movements that we want to capture themselves. Now, you might say, many of you, well, I'm not really interested in the Arab world, and so this is only of tangential concern to me. Yes, of course, the growing Muslim populations of Europe and increasingly North America may make this tumult an issue of domestic social policy, perhaps. And the threat of terrorism is naturally interesting to security analysts, and an oil shock could shake up financial markets. But what really should push me to be skeptical about my analytical training or to think again about the fundamental limits of my policy skills? I think the reason for that is that the Arab world, in its incredible complexity and range of possibility, may show us the future. Not because our future will be shaped by the specific grievances of Yemeni tribesmen or Tunisian vegetable vendors or Egyptian cyber cafe clients. It will not. But because we do not, in fact, know the range of possibilities in the 21st century. We face challenges in which what were once the outliers are moving very quickly to the center of the distribution. The increasingly volatile and extreme weather caused by quickening climate change, the intensifying pace of technological innovation in reshaping production and consumption, the accelerating global mobility of germs and ideas and weapons and people, all of this is contributing to a change that is more than simply a change in scale. So you, who will be managing this world in the coming decades, will therefore need to be more agile, more inventive, more adaptable, and more enterprising than we have taught you to be. Things that have varied together for decades do not anymore. Among my favorite examples, where do you think the highest per capita number of bloggers are? Egypt. And in Egypt, because the range of possibilities is so vast, so too is the imagination and initiative, and I might even say courage, of your generation. I do not mean to suggest that the analytical techniques of a high-quality public policy education are for naught. On the contrary, we at AUC are desperately trying to expose young Egyptians to probability theory and risk management and policy advocacy and other useful skills. We even have, and this is not a joke, an MA in public policy for revolutionaries. But it is not enough for them, and it is not enough for you. Fortunately, I think your generation is well equipped to take on teaching yourselves some of the skills and approaches that will be necessary to address the challenges of this century. And that is what you will have to do, because obviously we do not know the answers or even how to approach some of these questions. But your generation has already demonstrated from the time you were in primary school a capacity to learn from each other and to teach your elders. How else did anyone in my generation learn how to download the apps on our smartphones but from you? And I am therefore confident that your generation will be able to be inventive and be able to teach all the rest of us things that we will need to know in the coming decades. So I hope you start now to reflect on the challenges you will confront and to start using the restless and ambitious energy all students of public policy have to invent new approaches, try out new solutions, and imagine the future in a different way. If you do so, you will, in a very distant way, just as the movement of the butterfly's wings have unanticipated consequences halfway around the world, you will redeem the sacrifices of the young people throughout the Arab world. I want to conclude with a quick story. One of the part-time graduate students at AUC told me of an encounter she had at a demonstration in Cairo last winter. Like almost all AUC students, she was at a demonstration. It was a protest against the government, and it was getting a little bit violent as people began to throw rocks at the police. A thin, poorly dressed teenager ran up to her. She was obviously an affluent Cairene, even in her protest clothes, and shouted, get out, don't get shot, use your education to help us all." She was stunned, and I still am, and it is the message I bring to you from Cairo. Use your education to help us all. Thank you.